For years, Rachel Carter sacrificed everything for her family, her time, her money, even her happiness, all because she believed that's what a good daughter and sister should do. Every call from her mother was another demand. Every visit from her brother came with a new excuse for why he needed her help. She thought she was holding her family together. But the truth? They were only holding onto her for what she could give them. It wasn't until Rachel uncovered a shocking betrayal, one so deep it shattered everything she believed about her family, that she realized she wasn't their rock. She was their backup plan. And this time, she wasn't going to save them. Rachel grew up faster than any child should. Her father passed away when she was only 10, leaving her mother, Claire, to raise her and her younger brother, Dylan, alone. But Claire didn't cope well with the sudden loss. Grief turned into exhaustion, and exhaustion turned into apathy. Soon, Rachel found herself filling the gaps, cooking meals, helping Dylan with his homework, even reminding her mother to pay the bills. She wasn't just a big sister, she became the second parent. By the time she was 15, Rachel was balancing school, a part-time job, and a home life that demanded more from her than anyone realized. While her friends talked about weekend plans and high school crushes, Rachel worried about making sure Dylan had clean clothes and enough lunch money. Her mother began to lean on her more and more. Rachel, could you handle the grocery shopping today? I'm too tired. Rachel, can you pick up Dylan from soccer practice? I forgot. Each request came with a sigh or a tired excuse. And Rachel never said no. How could she? She loved them. They were her family. But love quickly turned into obligation. Claire began expecting Rachel to handle things, not asking. Expecting. And Dylan? He followed their mother's lead. Growing up without realizing his big sister wasn't just helping, she was carrying them. The rare moments Rachel did something for herself were met with guilt. When she saved up for a school trip, her mother looked at her with sad eyes and said, "Must be nice to afford something like that." Rachel didn't go. She handed the money over to help with the electric bill instead. Her dreams of college, traveling, and living life on her own terms faded into the background. Supporting her family wasn't just something she did, it became who she was. Years passed. Rachel graduated high school, skipped college, and took a full-time job. Every paycheck went to her family's needs first. Her own second, if there was anything left at all. And the more she gave, the more they expected. Rachel told herself this was temporary, that one day things would get better. But deep down, a quiet, bitter voice asked, "When?" Before I dive into what happened next, the moment that shattered everything Rachel believed about her family, I want to hear from you. Have you ever sacrificed your own happiness for someone you love? If this story resonates with you, hit that like button, and tell me where you're watching from by dropping your country's flag in the comments. Let's see how far Rachel's journey reaches, because trust me, this story is just getting started. Rachel didn't realize when the sacrifices stopped being temporary. What started as her helping out slowly turned into an unspoken agreement, one where she gave and they took. But the most painful part wasn't the workload or the missed opportunities. It was the way her mother and brother began to treat her. As though her sacrifices weren't just expected, they were owed. Claire mastered the art of guilt. When Rachel hesitated to give up a weekend shift to watch Dylan, her mother would sigh dramatically, her voice dripping with disappointment. "After everything I've been through, Rachel, I thought you'd understand how hard this is for me." Rachel would fold every time. How could she not? Her mother had suffered so much. Rachel told herself that putting her own needs aside was the least she could do. Dylan wasn't much better. He had grown used to Rachel's constant support, her driving him to practice, covering for him when he forgot his homework, even quietly slipping him money when he wanted to go out with friends. He never thanked her anymore. He didn't have to. It wasn't just guilt that held Rachel in place. There were glimpses of warmth too. Fleeting moments where her mother would hug her and say, "I don't know what we'd do without you." Or Dylan would casually mumble, "You're the best, Rach," before running off with his friends. Those rare scraps of affection kept her going, convincing her that maybe things weren't so bad. But the truth was, Rachel wasn't part of the family anymore, not in the way that mattered. She wasn't their daughter or sister. She was their safety net. their problem solver, their provider, and the more she gave, the less they seemed to value her. One night, everything came to a breaking point. Rachel had been working overtime for weeks to cover rent after Claire lost yet another job. She came home late, exhausted, only to find the house a mess and Dylan sitting on the couch, gaming without a care in the world. "Did anyone think to start dinner?" Rachel asked, her voice strained. Dylan didn't even look up. "Mom said you'd handle it." Rachel stared at him, something inside her cracking. She walked into the kitchen and found her mother scrolling through her phone, a glass of wine in hand. "Mom, I'm tired. I can't keep doing this. I'm working nonstop, and no one even helps." Claire barely glanced up. "We're all tired. Rachel, I lost my job. Remember? You're lucky you can work. Not everyone has that." Lucky. That word hit her like a slap. Rachel's voice shook. "Lucky? You think I'm lucky to be running myself into the ground for you? For Dylan? When do I get to live my own life?" Her mother's face twisted, her voice turning sharp and cold. "Oh, so that's what this is about. Poor Rachel, the martyr. You think you're better than us now? Go on then, leave, if it's so awful here." Rachel froze, stunned. For years, she believed her sacrifices were appreciated, maybe even necessary. But in that moment, she realized the truth. They didn't see her as a hero or a savior. She wasn't even family anymore. She was a tool, and tools were replaceable. The worst part? A small, broken part of her still hoped her mother would take it back, would realize how cruel she was being and apologize. But Claire just turned back to her phone, the conversation already over in her mind. Rachel walked upstairs, feeling numb. She had spent her whole life believing that love meant giving everything, even if it meant losing herself. Now, she wasn't sure if what her family felt for her was love at all. For the first time in years, Rachel started to wonder, what if I stopped? What if I walked away? Would they even miss me? Rachel woke up the next morning with a heavy ache in her chest, the kind that didn't come from exhaustion, but from the hollow feeling of knowing something was broken beyond repair. She went through the motions anyway, getting ready for work like nothing had changed. But everything felt different now. Her mother's words from the night before echoed in her head. "Leave. If it's so awful here." The truth was, Rachel didn't know if she could. As much as the weight of her family's needs crushed her, the idea of walking away felt impossible. They were her family, and despite everything, a part of her still loved them. But the universe seemed determined to push her to the edge. Later that week, Rachel came home early. Her manager had sent her home after noticing how pale and run down she looked. She thought maybe, just maybe, she'd get a moment of peace. Instead, she walked into a nightmare. The first thing she noticed was Dylan's voice, loud and laughing. He wasn't alone. A group of his friends were sprawled across the living room, pizza boxes and soda cans littering the floor. Rachel blinked in disbelief. The house looked trashed. "Dylan," she started, her voice low and tired. "What's going on?" He barely spared her a glance. "Relax, Rach. It's just a few friends." Rachel's stomach twisted. "Does Mom know you're doing this?" Dylan smirked. "Mom's not home. She went out with her new boyfriend." Rachel felt her heart drop. New boyfriend? Claire hadn't mentioned anyone. She hadn't mentioned going out either. Swallowing the knot in her throat, Rachel turned toward the stairs. Maybe if she just went to her room and shut the door, she could pretend this wasn't happening. But as she walked past the dining table, something caught her eye, a pile of papers sitting carelessly next to an empty wine glass. She stopped cold. It was an eviction notice. Rachel's breath caught in her throat. She snatched the papers up, her eyes racing over the words. The rent hadn't been paid in months. The landlord had given them until the end of the week to leave. Her mind spun. She had been giving her mother money for rent every month, more than enough to cover it. Where had it gone? Rachel stormed upstairs, her pulse hammering in her ears. She didn't even realize she was shaking until she tried to open her mother's bedroom door and her hand fumbled against the knob. The room was empty, but Rachel's eyes immediately locked onto the dresser. Claire's jewelry box was open, and tucked beside it was a receipt. Rachel's stomach dropped again. It wasn't for groceries or bills. It was a down payment for a vacation. A luxury weekend at a resort. Her hands trembled as she read it over and over. As though the words might change. The money she worked for. The money she sacrificed sleep and her health to earn. Claire had taken it. Not to keep them afloat. But to pamper herself. Rachel sank onto the edge of the bed. The papers falling from her hands. All those years of telling herself that her mother was doing her best. That Claire loved her and just didn't know how to show it. It felt like a cruel joke now. She wasn't just a safety net. She was a bank account. A resource to be drained. The front door slammed downstairs, jolting Rachel out of her daze. Claire's voice floated up the steps. Light and carefree. "Dylan, did you order pizza again? You're gonna spoil dinner." Rachel stood slowly, her hands curling into fists. For the first time in her life, she didn't feel afraid to confront her mother. Claire barely looked surprised when Rachel appeared at the top of the stairs. The eviction notice crumpled in her hand. "Rachel," she said, sighing like this was an inconvenience. "I was going to tell you." "When?" Rachel's voice shook. But it wasn't from fear anymore. "After we were kicked out? After I came home to find all our stuff on the curb? I've been giving you everything I have. Where did it go?" "Mom? A vacation?" Claire's eyes flickered with something. Guilt? Annoyance? "It didn't matter anymore. I deserved to have a life too," she said defensively. "You think I wanted this? To be stuck like this? I deserve something nice for once." Rachel stared at her, feeling like she didn't recognize the woman in front of her anymore. "We're about to lose our home. And you spent the rent money on a vacation?" Claire scoffed. "You're so dramatic. We'll figure it out, you always do." Something inside Rachel snapped. The weight she carried for so long, the guilt. The obligation. The hope that maybe one day her mother would see her. Really see her, shattered. For the first time, she didn't feel sorry for Claire. She felt done. "You know what, Mom?" Rachel's voice was steady, stronger than it had been in years. "I'm not fixing this. Not this time." Claire's eyes widened, but Rachel didn't wait for her to respond. She turned and walked upstairs. Her heart pounding. She wasn't sure what came next. But one thing was clear. She was done being their lifeline. Rachel sat in her room. The weight of everything pressing down on her chest like a cinder block. The eviction notice lay crumpled on her nightstand. A cruel reminder of just how far things had spiraled. For years, she bit her tongue, swallowed her feelings, and convinced herself that enduring it all made her strong, that taking care of everyone, no matter how unfair, was her responsibility. But now, she felt something else bubbling beneath the surface. It wasn't sadness or disappointment. It was anger, raw, unfiltered anger, and for the first time, she didn't push it down. She let it burn. Rachel wasn't going to fix this. Not anymore. The next morning, she didn't get up early to make breakfast or clean up after Dylan's mess. She didn't rush out to pick up extra shifts. Instead, she stayed in bed, staring at the ceiling. The house stirred around her, muffled voices. The sound of the front door slamming shut. They didn't even check on her. By noon, Rachel got up and faced the mirror. Her reflection looked hollow, but something fierce flickered behind her eyes. She grabbed her phone and made 2 calls. One to her boss, asking for a week off, and the second to her best friend, Maya. Maya didn't even hesitate. "Rachel, you can stay with me as long as you need. You don't owe them your life." Hearing those words felt like a crack of light breaking through the darkness. Rachel packed her things quickly, not everything. Just what mattered. A duffel bag of clothes, her laptop, and the small box of keepsakes she hid under her bed. As she zipped the bag shut, the sound of the front door opening downstairs made her freeze. Her mother's voice carried up the stairs. "Rachel, you better not be lying around all day. We need money for groceries." Rachel closed her eyes, her jaw tightening. Then, slowly, she slung the bag over her shoulder and walked downstairs. Claire was in the kitchen, scrolling through her phone. Dylan was on the couch, gaming like nothing had changed. Rachel's voice came out steady, calm, but sharp. "I'm leaving." Claire looked up, frowning. "Leaving to where?" "To Maya's." Rachel said. "I'm done, Mom. I can't keep doing this. I gave you everything, and you threw it all away. I'm not going to save you this time." For a moment, Claire stared at her like she didn't understand. Then her expression twisted. You're abandoning us? Rachel let out a bitter laugh. One she didn't even know she had in her. Abandoning you? I've been the only one holding this family together. And you? You spent the rent money on a vacation. You lied to me. You used me. Claire's face reddened. Don't act like you're some victim. You live here too. It's your responsibility to help. No, Rachel said firmly. It's your responsibility. You're my mother. And Dylan? He's not a kid anymore. I'm done raising both of you. Dylan finally looked over, muttering, "Wow, drama queen much?" Rachel's voice didn't waver. You can call it whatever you want. But I'm done being your backup plan. Claire scoffed. Go, then. See how long you last without us. Rachel met her eyes. And for the first time, she didn't feel small. I think I'll last just fine. She turned and walked out the door. Her heart racing. The cool air hit her face. And for a second, she thought the weight would come crashing back down. But it didn't. It lifted. As she headed to Maya's, her phone buzzed. A message from her boss. Take the week. You deserve the break. We'll figure things out when you're back. For the first time in what felt like forever, Rachel smiled. She wasn't sure what the future looked like anymore. But one thing was certain. It was hers now. And no one was going to take that from her again. A week passed. And for the first time in years, Rachel felt like she could breathe. Staying with Maya felt strangely peaceful. No yelling. No guilt tripping. No constant weight on her shoulders. She woke up without that familiar knot in her stomach. And each day felt a little lighter. Maya helped her see what she'd been too blinded by loyalty to recognize. She wasn't selfish for leaving. She wasn't cruel for choosing herself. She was finally free. But freedom, it turned out, didn't come without its own kind of pain. Late one night, Rachel's phone buzzed on the nightstand. Half asleep, she reached for it, squinting at the screen. A missed call from her mom. Then another, and another. Her heart sank. Before she could process it, a text came through. Rachel, please. We need you. It's bad. Call me. Rachel stared at the message. Her chest tightening. 1,000 thoughts swirled in her head. Was this another manipulation? Another guilt trip? But deep down, a part of her, the part that still remembered the mom who used to tuck her in at night, couldn't ignore it. She called back. Claire picked up instantly, her voice shaky and weak. Rachel, it's Dylan. He got into a fight, a bad one. He's in the hospital. Please. I need you. Rachel's throat tightened. For a second, she couldn't speak. Her mind flashed to Dylan, her little brother. The same boy she used to defend on the playground. The one who, despite everything, she still loved. Maya, I have to go, Rachel said, her voice trembling as she grabbed her coat. Maya's eyes widened with concern. Are you sure? After everything they put you through? Rachel swallowed hard. They're still my family. The hospital felt cold and sterile, buzzing with the hum of machines and the occasional echo of muffled conversations. Rachel found her mom in the waiting room, looking smaller than she'd ever seen her, eyes red, makeup smudged, hands trembling. Claire looked up, relief washing over her face. Rachel. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Claire broke down, sobbing. I didn't know what to do. He's hurt so bad. I was so scared. Rachel's anger simmered beneath the surface. But seeing her mom like this, vulnerable, broken, stirred something else. Compassion. Where is he? Rachel asked softly. Claire led her down the hall. Dylan was barely recognizable, his face swollen and bruised. A bandage over his forehead. He looked so young, so helpless. Rachel's chest tightened painfully. Despite everything, he was still her brother. She sat by his bed, reaching for his hand. It felt cold. He stirred, his voice barely a whisper. Rach, you came. Her throat tightened. Yeah, I'm here. For a while, they sat in silence. Rachel wasn't sure what to say, or if she even needed to say anything. Just being there felt like enough. Claire lingered in the doorway, watching them. Her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. Rachel, I'm sorry. For everything. I should have been a better mom. I should have protected you, not the other way around. Rachel looked up, the anger in her chest flickering. She wanted to hold onto it, to remind her mother of all the pain. The betrayal, but the exhaustion in Claire's voice sounded too real to ignore. I don't know if I can forgive you, Rachel admitted, her voice raw. But I'm too tired to hate you anymore. Claire nodded slowly, tears spilling down her cheeks. I don't deserve your forgiveness. But I'm so glad you're here. Rachel looked back at Dylan, squeezing his hand gently. Maybe this wasn't the ending she wanted. But it was a new beginning, one she never saw coming. Rachel sat by the window of Maya's apartment, watching the city lights flicker against the night sky. The past few weeks felt like a lifetime. Like she'd lived through a storm and somehow made it out on the other side. Dylan was recovering. He'd text her that morning. A simple, thanks for being there, Rach. It wasn't much, but it meant everything. Their relationship wasn't magically fixed. Too much had happened for that, but it was a start. Her mom hadn't reached out again. Rachel wasn't sure how she felt about that. There was a strange, aching emptiness where the old longing used to be. For so long, she'd craved her mother's approval, bending over backward to earn scraps of affection. But now, that need was fading. It didn't hurt the way it used to. Maya walked in, setting 2 cups of tea on the table. You look like you're somewhere else, she said gently. Rachel exhaled, smiling faintly. Just thinking. It's weird. I thought leaving would feel like running away. Like I was abandoning them. But now, I think staying would have been abandoning myself. Maya nodded, a soft, knowing smile tugging at her lips. It's hard to unlearn that kind of guilt. But you didn't walk away from them. You walked toward yourself. Rachel stared at her cup, the steam curling up into the air. She thought about everything, the years of emotional manipulation, the sacrifices, the betrayals, and realized something profound. She wasn't the same girl who left that house. She wasn't someone who existed to fix other people anymore. For the first time in her life, she wasn't someone's emotional crutch, someone's safety net, someone's second choice. She was Rachel, and that was enough. I don't know what happens next, Rachel admitted softly, but I'm not scared of it anymore. Maya leaned back, smirking. Well, I heard the coffee shop down the street is hiring. You could start there, and maybe, if you're feeling wild, finally sign up for those art classes you always talked about. Rachel laughed, a real, unburdened laugh. It felt good, freeing. Maybe the road ahead wouldn't be easy. Maybe her family would never truly change. But for once, that wasn't her problem to fix. She had her own life to live, and she wasn't going to waste another second of it. As the city hummed outside, Rachel leaned into the quiet, peaceful warmth of the moment. She didn't need a perfect ending. She had a new beginning. And that was more than enough. Rachel's journey isn't just about breaking free from a toxic family dynamic. It's about finding the courage to choose yourself. Even when it feels impossible. It's a reminder that sometimes, walking away isn't giving up. It's the bravest thing you can do to reclaim your life. What about you? Did Rachel's story resonate with you? If you loved the journey, drop a 2 in the comments, and if it wasn't your vibe, hit 7. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel for more powerful, thought-provoking stories like this one. Your support means the world, and trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next.